everybody, how's it going? Dan Shinder here live on Drum Talk TV on the Drum Talk TV Facebook page. Coming to you from Globe, Arizona, 100 miles east of Phoenix in the mountains. And our wonderful guest today is Aldo Mazza, who's coming to us from Montreal in Quebec, Canada. Hopefully there won't be a language barrier. Aldo, how are you?
I am fantastic, and actually, I resolved the language barrier. I speak 4 languages fluently. So
perfect. So let me guess. They are English, French, Italian, and Spanish. Oh wow! I nailed it. Awesome. That's
great. You're good. You're good.
Great. And speaking of Spanish and Latin music and the Latin culture, you just finished up a big event in Cuba, of all places. Tell us about that. And I'm so eager for this because I have always wanted to go to Cuba, even if it's just to admire, not just for the wonderful music, but to admire the wonderful automobiles that are trapped in time. And welcome, everybody. Tell us where you're watching from. And Aldo, tell us about this wonderful project in Cuba.
Well, you can tell I'm probably beaming right now because I just came back on the weekend. And it's always exciting. It's been 18 years that we do this festival camp, and it's a camp festival workshop that we do in Cuba. As you know, we've been doing this for the last 24 years. We started in Vermont, and then we stretched out to Cuba, and now in China, Europe, here in Montreal, and we do these weekend intensives in New York, Miami, and in various other places. But the one in Cuba is really exciting, and they're all different.
Yeah.
This one, a 1-week intensive studying with all the top drummers and musicians in Cuba, learning the culture, the rhythms.
Nice.
So we have an all-day 10 to 5 classes. Then we go to the concerts of the Fiesta del Tambor, which is the Havana Rhythm and Dance Festival that we've been a major part of and sponsor for the last 18 years. So
that's a long time.
Yeah, there are 3 things going on. It started off small, and the whole idea was to celebrate, rhythm drumming and the drummers of Cuba. And of course, when we say drummers, Fiesta del Tambor translates into drum festival, but it's not just a drum festival as you and I know it, like the modern drummer festival and all of that. It's not like that at all. It's really about all the music, the traditional, the rumba groups, the timba groups, the new jazz, fusion, Cuban, and it's really amazing what they're doing. So you've got like 15-piece bands. You've got the top of the people, top artists from dance and music and tradition and all the new stuff and everything in between for a whole week. It's
wow.
Really crazy.
That's a lot to absorb. And I have to say, one of my favorite pieces of musical works that is not traditional Western rock or jazz or progressive rock or anything is a CD music my father turned me on to about 15 years ago called the Buena Vista Social Club. And it's just fantastic music. And some of it is so subtle and not making a big party jam, but it's just such beautiful music, and it oozes Cuba. It's just wonderful music.
It's deep. And, and that's music of the 40s and 50s. And it took even the Cubans by surprise because there are many musics in Cuba, very different ones, different lineages. Right. That was what took them by surprise. I said, they said to themselves, why are they interested in this? This is old. But, I mean, that's good. There's a lot of stuff going on. In our faculty that we have at the Cosa Cuba workshop and festival, the timbale player of Buena Vista Social Club, Amadito Valdez, is one of our instructors.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Just so you know what we're dealing with. And Changuito, Geraldo Piloto, all Enrique Pla, who was the original drummer for Irequere, Chucho Valdez.
Yeah.
So all of these people, past and present, and the new guys that are inventing things that are just out of this world, totally different. That's faculty, yeah.
Is there a lot of fusion amongst different Cuban musical lineages, and is there fusion amongst the Cuban influence bringing in other influences like Western, more mainstream or traditional jazz or other things like that?
Absolutely.
That's
Don't
great.
forget, don't forget that Cuba in general, and most people, sometimes forget, or they may not know, or if they do, they would forget. Uh, Education is one of the highest priorities, has been since the 60s in Cuba.
Right.
Therefore, education also means not only training everyone, it's free education. So whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or a musician, you get top-notch education. So the music and dance profession are professions, just like doctors or lawyers. So they're
Yeah.
treated as such. So they all study classical music in the conservatories, right up to university level, and then they also study their own traditions on top of that. So they're like totally complete musicians. And so what happens is, because of the other influences, and because they really do promote themselves, and they try to encourage, the government has encouraged them to record, and they give them all the facilities that they need to archive, maintain, and be active in. So it's like
Hmm.
this mega machine constantly active. So of course, over the years, they've had the influences of R&B, for example, James Brown, Tower of Power. So the whole songo thing, it was all about funk. Really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they, what they had, the song, and they just brought in this other in from the back to mix it in, and voila, songo. Then you
Yes.
have the other style that they call timba,
Hmm.
which is even a whole other level. And now there's this a group that I saw recently, uh, Tim Funk. What's it called? Sima Funk.
Sima
Sima.
funk. Okay.
So here, check this out. This is like all those things that you've seen so far. John Blackwell on drums, okay,
Wow.
and like that style, but mixed in with all their tradition. They're all mixed in there, and a 17-year-old James Brown fronting the band.
Wow.
Try and picture that, and then mixing in all the stuff that has happened before, a totally funk groove. So you have this whole mix, but not losing their tradition, and it makes it like so interesting. It's
That's
really
neat.
insane.
That's awesome. Before we continue, I want to show the audience a clip. You won't see it, but the audience will see it. And it's a clip from a previous Fiesta di Tambor. And you're playing a very interesting drum kit that has a djembe and a brush on we'll call it a bass drum. So I want to show them this to get an idea of some of the um, more out of the box playing and setups that you've used. So folks, check this out right here. Here we go. It's actually a frame drum that he's using as his bass drum.
Exactly.
And it's got the brush on the
And
pedal.
I've been doing that.
What I love about this as we're watching it is that it's a great example that not all musical drumming has to be just slamming and bashing away. There's a lot of these subtleties that are just make it so musical. You got the hi hats.
Oh, sorry, having a little.
So that gives everybody an idea. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about what you have. Well, tell us about the setups and how you decide, these different odd setups that have all sorts of other percussion instruments mixed into the drum set, or a set like that that's just completely comprised of things that are not part of a drum set other than the hi-hat that you had.
Right. Well, it all starts with, I was originally a rock drummer, and then I studied classical percussion. Met at McGill University. I met the guys in my group, Repercussion, and I've been touring with them ever since. So that's the whole classical side of things.
Mhm.
And then I got interested in the whole world music. I did do graduate studies in ethnomusicology. Became very, very interested in African drumming, Cuban drumming, Arabic drumming, North African, all of these. So that's always been an interest for me. And at one point, it was just overwhelming. And I'm sure anybody who's in this position of you're playing one instrument and then you have to practice another. I would wake up every morning with the 30-second panic that I would forget everything I knew. And then also, you're looking at 24 hours a day, and in the accounting department, it just didn't make sense. How could you practice timpani, mallets, drum set, congas, timbales, djembe, and frame drums, ricks, and everything else, all of these different things. And then I would study with Glenn Velez, and I would study with all of these different people that I admired. Then I thought, you know what, the only way to get through to this is to combine them. So while I'm practicing any frame drums, any rick or tar or any of those, or the tarantella, South Italian drum, I would also accompany myself with the feet so I can keep that going. So I just doubled up as much as possible, or while I'm doing one thing with one hand, I would practice mallets with the other.
Wow. That's crazy. So that's how it came about.
That's the original idea. And then I thought, well, this is so cool. And then I started adding, electronics with that looping. And then also it really helped that I was on tour. We used to do 150 concerts a year with repercussion. Right. So that forced me every day to play all the instruments while I kept up my drum set playing.
Yeah.
I would just come up with shortcut ways to get at these. And the whole brush thing came along when Glenn Velez, I was studying with Glenn and years previous, and there's a Trio Globo record I got from him. And I was listening, and he was doing something with a brush on a drum. And when he came to our KOSA camp, he was a regular every year. So one day, this was maybe 19 years ago, when I started working with this hybrid concepts, I said, Glenn, I figured that thing out you did. I was so proud. He comes over and looks at it. He says, Aldo, that's brilliant. That's very nice. It's very smart. But that's not what I'm doing.
Isn't that interesting how we often can have our own interpretations of something that we think we hear, we think we see, and we have our own sort of interpretation. I remember an interview where Rick Wakeman of Yes was explaining back in 1991 when they had the Union tour, and it was different factions of Yes playing together. So Tony Kaye, the original keyboardist, and Rick Wakeman were playing together, and Rick had played songs that Tony had played on, and then Tony had come back later in the band and played on songs that Rick had played on, and they discovered that all those years they were playing each other's material, they were playing something different, like their own sort of spin on it. They didn't look at sheet music that was transposed. They just learned the songs and realized after discussion and playing together that there were all those years playing something different than what the other one played. It's kind of the same thing, our own interpretations, Well,
it's also like Trilai Gurtu, for example, who the first time he came on the scene and I saw a clinic with him, I had heard records that he was on with John McLaughlin, and he sounded like Tony Williams.
Yeah.
So we think that's what it looks like. And then I saw him live, and I was completely confused. He has no bass. It's all his hands.
Yeah.
So I went up to him and I said, I am really confused. Like, how do you do that? Like, what happened? He says, well, I was listening to the records, and I'm a tabla player, and I thought that's the way you play everything.
So funny.
So,
wow.
So it is exactly that, Dan, that, what we hear and what we transpose in our minds is our own interpretation of the thing.
Yeah.
Until we actually see it,
right,
we imagine it's something else. So it's a great thing to just listen to music.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen to as much different kinds of music as you can, folks. You may be able to pull some wonderful things from music that you have a preconceived notion that it's not for you or it's not your thing or you might not like it. I have circled back to music in my more let's say mature years. I've circled back to music I would not be caught dead listening to when it came out in the 80s, and now I really enjoy it and admire it and have a lot of respect for it. So always keep those horizons broaden. And speaking of broadening your horizons, Aldo, tell us about KOSA. And before you do, I want to mention to folks, and Gilbert's going to drop in a link, that if you follow www.kosamusic.com, you'll be able to find out the details that are going to be released very soon about a KOSA event that Aldo is hosting in Montreal, June 25th through the 30th.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In Montreal.
Yeah, so tell us what KOSA is and how people can get involved and what the takeaways have been for people.
That's a great question. Let's see if we have 10 hours for me to explain.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, I mean, for 24 years, my wife and I, Yolan Kovac, who's the co-founder of KOSA, she's also a musician, a pianist, and a violinist. And, we've always kind of dreamt up what would be the ultimate experience from a musician point of view and inspiration. My first inspiration was I was just a regular rock drummer, but I wanted something different. I had people I was listening to at a distance, but I just couldn't figure them up. Joe Morello, Gary Burton. I would hear all these people, and it was seeping in, but I just couldn't get it. So I went to a camp, a Ludwig International Percussion Symposium. Mm-hmm. And there I met Joe Morello, Gary Burton, Carmine Appice was there, Lee Stevens was there, all of these great people. And I was just so inspired. A week intensive with these people, I was so inspired by the experience that it rocketed me into where I am. Mm-hmm. And then it inspired me. I said, later on, I am going to do a camp that is going to be that gave me what I needed to be, that trajectory that I needed. Mm-hmm. And it was rocket. And I said, we're going to do that, but on a much higher level, much more personal, much more family, and like anything we can think of to make this. So 24 years ago, we started that in Vermont, a 1 week intensive total percussion with all the top people coming on faculty. Everybody from Steve Smith to Kenwood Denard. I mean, even Neil Peart came join us. We were fortunate to have him join us for a little bit. All kinds of people in the classical world, and Brazilian, Cuban, the top people. We even brought in Changuito from Cuba.
Oh, wow.
Horacio Hernandez, Ed Shaughnessy, you name it. They were there. At one point, we had 29 faculty in the program and 5 classes a day, evening concerts open to the public. So it was a festival, educational, performance, high-end, and the best of everybody and everything. And then we started expanding that idea. Then we started in Cuba doing the same idea, but focusing on only Cuban percussion and drumming. Mm-hmm. So people come from all over the world to study our program, a week intensive, hands-on, personalized instruction with the top people, from Changuito to Amedito Valdez to all the guys in Cuba, and a festival called the Fiesta del Tambor, which Geraldo Piloto is the artistic director, and we've worked together for the last 18 years. Now, in that workshop festival, the KOSA Cuba event, we have 3 things going on. Our workshop, actually 4 things. Our own workshop, and we have our own controlled environment. We have instruments down there. We're totally fully equipped. Then we have the evening concerts of the festival, which are like the top people in Cuba, plus international guests. This year, we had Mark Juliana Trio join us.
Nice.
And by the way, Mark Juliana was one of our KOSA participants in the camps 18 years ago for a couple of years. So he's an alumni, KOSA alumni. Yeah. And then we had Jojo Mayer, we've had Antonio Sanchez, all these people come to Cuba to give master classes to the Cubans and participate in the festival. Then we have a national competition during that whole week. in 5 categories: drum set, congas, timbales, bongo, and bata. And the winners win the instruments. We have
Oh,
been bringing, yeah, since they don't really have the instruments to give, so we have been bringing the instruments down for the last 18 years to give to
wow.
the contest winners. And in the beginning, we were alone on this, bringing instruments like in all these situations, helping the schools out, the artists, this competition. And then 6, 7 years ago, Sabian, and I'm a Sabian artist, I'm an endorser, and they, I explained to them, I said, I would love to have your help out there. And Bob Zildjian, when he was alive, was, bless his soul, he was a great, great visionary. We had a meeting back in Meductic, and he said, I've been watching you, and I love what you're doing in Cuba, and we really want to help. I know the situation. Please guide us. So I've been helping them in Cuba. They've been on board with Sabian and Gone Bobs.
Nice.
We've signed like 30 of the top artists. So there's a whole endorsement program in Cuba. They have the instruments there. They can purchase them in Cuba now. So
That's great. Wow.
and they're a big sponsor in this whole project. We've created the portal that they needed, and so that's done. So now it's just each year just gets bigger, better, and more exciting each year.
That's great.
And then now we're actually looking at another one in Matanzas that we're looking at doing next year. So more information on that one.
Great. Do you happen to know, I'm sorry, do you happen to know when you're going back to Cuba?
Probably in a month, because I go 7, 8 times a year, because we also take school groups down to Cuba in cultural exchanges, in performances, and apart from this particular project, which happens in March of every year, we also take groups down. We facilitate high schools, universities, choral groups, anything in the culture sector. Mm-hmm. We have been doing that for years. So I go there.
And how often do you do like the big program? Is it only every March?
That particular one is only in March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And what consequently what I've done also is I've released a book, I think you know the book, right?
Yeah.
Cuban Rhythms for Percussion and Drum Set, The Essentials with Alfred Music. Yeah. It's a top seller now, and it's going in its 4th printing. I spent 3 years doing this, almost to the point of insanity. But the thing is, Dan, I was there facilitating this for years and drawing from the very people who invented, these rhythms. And then I said, you know what, I should document all this and put it the methodology is important. Put it in such a way that, not for them, because they know what they're doing, but sometimes the communication is not the best. Mm-hmm. And also to explain something and also re-explain everything, because most of the things that we see from here are incorrect, and since I've been spending so much time there, I saw that. I said, a lot of the learning that we have done, even from the major guys from here, unfortunately, and it's not their fault, they haven't spent enough time there to get what it really is. We think it looks like that, but it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, you say, Latin music. Well, Latin music is everything south of Florida.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah. But to say it's all Afro-Cuban is totally false.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Look at everything from Mexico to Central America, South America, and even within South America, if you compare Brazilian music to what's going on in Chile and Argentina, it's different music. It's Latin music, but there's definitely differences.
Absolutely. And Cuba is never, we hardly say, no, this is Cuban. And everyone, myself included, we always, it's Afro-Cuban, until you're there long enough and you say, wait a minute, this is all wrong.
Right.
There are at least 5 or 6 different channels. Some of them French, coming from roots, Hispanic roots, and some are African.
Right.
And they're not even close.
Yeah.
They do meet on the ground. So Cuba is a musical continent.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible. For someone who's interested, this is like the greatest oasis on the planet musically.
It's the melting pot for all of those influences to come together, right?
And also, so mmany things are invented in Cuba. For example, what we call congas, which are really called tumbadoras.
Mm-hmm.
Because conga is a rhythm that comes from the Santiago area, the eastern part of the province, of the country. And that's a rhythm. It's not an instrument. So, that's why all of these things are just incorrect, things that we've read and passed on without knowing. It's nobody's fault.
Right.
So I'm in the business of helping clear that up. Maybe for generations it might take, but I'm glad to be spearheading this. That the book is finally clearing this up without putting blame. Just let's get this straight. These are instruments invented in Cuba.
Right.
The timbales were invented in Cuba, which come from the timpani.
Right.
That's what it's called timbales. In French, they are timbales.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have a history. And then bongo are totally a Cuban instrument. And the techniques that go along with each of those instruments are totally Cuban. Plus the rhythms that have been created from songo to Mozambique to pilon to, there are at least 50 that I can think of.
Right.
They were invented in Cuba and in a short time.
You mentioned Mozambique. I love that kind of music. Is that of a French influence?
No, actually the roots would be Cuban.
Okay.
African. But here's an interesting thing. What some people know as Mozambique, or they say Mozambique, is not Mozambique. What we're playing, there's a two different. I noticed there are two different Mozambique. New York, Mozambique is something that comes from Puerto Rico, New York, and they call it Mozambique. Okay. In Cuba, that rhythm is actually, and which one is that? That's now you've got me. It's a different. For example, that's not the Mozambique. That's the wait a minute. Let me get my book.
Sure, absolutely. And we'll talk about where you can get Aldo's book as well. It's on Amazon, is it?
Yes, but kosamusic.com /shop.
There you go.
You can get it online and it'll be delivered to them also. This is it comes with 75 play-along tracks that we recorded in Havana and in Montreal with all Cuban performers and people.
Beautiful.
Full tracks. They're not just samples. They play along.
That's great.
And 38 video clips to show the technique, the conga language, the musical language that you need to know. Plus, what I've done is created setup exercises for the drum set player. Once they learn the various rhythms, then you say, how would I transfer these to the drum set? Rather than just learning a beat, you get the process, which is really important.
Yeah.
A much larger idea.
Absolutely.
So for example, and this is really interesting because when we talk about Mozambique, people should know, and I think it's just interesting to know, not that we're going to fight about it or argue about it, but what happens, for example, what we call Mozambique sometimes in New York is actually the comparsa, the conga comparsa that you have in the eastern part of the country, which is actually that groove that Steve Gadd plays on late in the evening.
Yeah.
It's not in Mozambique. In New York it would be, but it's really the Cuban comparsa.
Got it. Yeah.
Interesting to see, how that translates. And I didn't make a big point of it because there's no point, saying, oh no, this is wrong, that's wrong. That's not the issue. The issue is just knowing what something is in the country of its origin,
right?
Than what somebody else did with it, which is totally fine, but it's different.
Yeah.
But knowing that difference is fantastic, and knowing
absolutely,
the rumba, what the rumba is, that's Afro-Cuban.
Yeah.